My name is Yasser Johnson, and this is my presentation for AI as a teacher. So, my overview is for my topic, I was using ChatGPT to teach me how to run a business in New York City. I was interested in something that looked like a chauffeur or private driver experience in New York City, and I was trying to see if Gen AI, can help me facilitate all of the soft skills required to facilitate a partnership with several other partners. And so I was able to give real time advice. And again, this is it happening in actual. This is actually happening. A mixture of pragmatic and philosophical scenarios. Some are mostly are real, but sometimes I did create hypothetical situations just so I can get an idea on how to think about certain things or things that I think might happen in the future. Alignment and soft skill instruction. I was able to um, have a back and forth about financial decision making. And so we'll go into detail about evaluating debt between partners. There's a lot of opportunities for executing the business, and I use this chat to also develop certain documents or contracts between clients and personnel. And in doing so, I also um, uh, made the persona that ChatGPT was going to amplify a an evaluation um, successful business person, and so the tone that it often led with was one that was serious and stern. So to the right, I also included the XML tags and meta instructions. That when I'm learning these skills and material, that it provides feedback and evaluates um, my understanding. And I think that didn't start until like checkpoint 4, but you'll see it throughout this presentation. So an example of self-directed learning and application um, was in itself how I designed the learning environment before actually did anything. So I made sure that my opening prompt, I didn't ask ChatGPT for like business concepts. I told it to try to teach me the soft and hard skills. Um, and so the caveat with that is, as when the issue arrives, when the issue comes up in real time, that is typically when I go into ChatGPT and ask to troubleshoot. And so that in itself is self-directed. Um, I also asked it to be brutally honest with me, right? Giving it a persona of a serious business person. Um, I told it to not be reassuring, and I think that distinction, um, seeking, being correct over like being comfortable, is what leads to this self-directing learning. But in general, in this many times, I was told that my answers were partially correct, and it'll also often tell me to try again with some leading questions that I should be trying to answer. And in doing so, the AI explicitly named my conceptual gaps. And in this case, it conflated when I was asking how can I manage a certain amount of debt. Um, it told me that I was conflating personal credit with the business credit that I can potentially have or make. And so in doing so, I was able to actualize business credit based on its instruction. And so one thing that leads for this to be self-directed is I didn't abandon the conversation after being challenged. Um, And so I told him um, our business idea, that I was going to get a high luxury vehicle with that cash, or with that business credit. And despite it telling me that it was um, a, a, a high risk play, because it was already actualized, I can't do nothing about that. So moments of struggle, specifically, was defining the business. My first attempt at defining what I call BK shade luxury was rejected outright. ChatGPT called it a category description and not a business, and said that my business pitch was underdeveloped, and had to go through three different um, versions. And even my third attempt was just only good enough to move forward, but still flagged as too broad, right? So it's looking for a business plan, and I'm only giving it like a paragraph or so, and it's telling me that it's not enough. But this almost is exactly um, is an example of like the learning process within the classroom. Sometimes the subject matter um, goes far ahead than the actual pace, um, or it there's things that are misconceptions. There are misconceptions that I have to address um, later down the line. So that moment of frustration is clearly visible because I'm asking it. I'm telling you this is the last time I'm going to do it. This is my last do over. Even if I get the overview incorrect. And so that learning progression was measurable across those three attempts, from vague to extensive. And while AI was not overly incorrect, it often took everything I said as fact. So in my business um, proposition, I said that some people might not take Uber or Lyft, and I kind of just made that up, right? So it one thing I would communicate, it's not exactly the AI getting something wrong, but it did take everything I said at face value. Just another struggle was I proposed a 40-60 split for the revenue for the driver and the company, reasoning that the company was taking on the operational structure. And in this moment of struggle, and I thought that was a good idea, ChatGPT actually said that if the driver owns the asset, right, there's no reason why they would give the company so much. And so I wouldn't be able to guarantee that sort of relationship. This correction forced me to think about leverage, right? What does it look like from the contractors or the driver's perspective, and not just my own as the company. Um, and I was asking for most of the money, even though they were doing a lot of the work. And so ultimately, I decided um, that it might be best to have a separate arrangement for drivers while onboarded, um, with their own vehicle versus those who use the vehicle of the company. And again, this moment of struggle comes because I'm not necessarily well informed on how this is supposed to go, and ChatGPT is sort of guiding me in that right direction. The one criticism again that I would say is um, the structure it did say. I think it said like a 2030, 70/80, so a 2030. I wonder where it got those figures from, because I would assume that not every successful business has its figures done that way. So when it comes down to error correction, I'm told them a scenario in which my partner proposed taking on a substantial amount of debt, and my first response was to ask clarifying questions. ChatGPT partially rated my answer as partially correct, um, given the scenario that it created. My breakthrough moment came when I really stopped responding to it um, as a partner and started being data driven. As in, I stopped responding to it with emotions, and really use figures and business jargon to then drive the decision that yes or no about the debt. So this was a conceptual sort of like shift in my brain where I'm thinking from a standpoint of if um, if it makes sense in real time, then that should be enough. But ChatGPT is saying that it it only makes sense if the numbers make sense, and that should drive your decision making. And so, based on this reply, to have more conviction, I established a more developed idea um, on on where that debt should land. Um, and in this sort of case, right, I propose validating with maybe like 10 to 20K of debt and then scaling after we have real contracts. And so this revision moved from a level of like passive questioning to like active restructure. And so that when I can go back to my partners, I can have this restructure or this idea to come to the table with. One hypothetical that I gave it, again, because this is all real time, my learning experiences comes from, anecdotal and like um, hypotheticals. So I proposed what would it look like to have like a promotional service, right? What does free service look like? And ChatGPT simply rejected that idea, saying that you know promotional times is like giving away free money, and you will only uh, attract customers who cannot commit to you, which is antithetical to the trust chauffeur business that I was trying to create. So I proposed a part of it, suggesting a hypothetical involving giving a certain amount of free rides, 1,000 free rides, and I put in a subjective cost because I felt like if I didn't put in the numbers or the figures, it wouldn't like it would give me more of a philosophical answer. And so ChatGPT did not capitulate. Instead, it gave me questions in which, because it was a hypothetical, I did not have all of the answers for. But it definitely distinguished between what um, a theoretical framework looks like versus what happens in actual spaces. And so I try to say that in real as a real world experience, I'm sure there are a lot of different companies that have actually used free promotions to gain a client base, and ChatGPT shot that rejected that idea. So I'm just communicating that this was something that I thought would be helpful at first, and it was not. And so the learning progression here definitely went from theory to an actual operations and actual revenue being created. The conversation moved through distinct phases, each building on other previous real time experiences. ChatGPT's own audit um, also provides um, a clear demonstration of this. So I'm going to go into that in the next slide. And so yeah, it went from something vague to a targeted, um, trust based um, company. And as I'm learning in real time, I think the difficulty is how do I know that I'm grasping this information, and rather it just be a lived experience that I'm having. So I'll also go into more detail as well. But yeah, it went from operational planning, or this arc moved from a vague aspiration to financial specificity, operation and planning to legal documentation to a clear cognitive progression within a single thread, GI, a general AI thread. Ways that my thinking has changed and key takeaways. The business identity, again, before I approached this, I thought of it was a taxi service for high end customers. But AI helped me refine the idea that this is a trust and consistency based um, operation, still with those high customers. Before I thought that to actually uh, do anything, I approached this with accumulating debt to expedite operations. But after comprehending that I would need customers first. Um, it's that demand will then lead to conviction. The validation strategy and partnership soft skills that I developed before I requested how to approach certain conversations with my partners. But then I'm now realizing that a lot of times you cannot react emotionally. It's a thing where you have to back up what you are saying with clear cut decision making and data driven decisions. And another thing that changed is my idea of financial literacy. Before I came into this, thinking revenue was the goal, but AI pressured the idea that a repeat customer basis is the crucial metric for a successful business. In this case, just a reflection, ChatGPT functioned as a genuine teacher, withholding validation, forcing redos, and escalating difficulty as mastery grew. Before checkpoint 4, that is when we started using the meta instructions. Gen AI was more informational than instructional. And then after those instructions, it began to evaluate with more rigor, often requiring multiple attempts before identifying a viable answer. And so that sort of pushback is an example of how skilled educators also have to withhold validation for deeper thinking for their students. The most significant learning happened when it told me that I was incorrect, or it told me to keep doing things over and over. I gave it a very serious persona, so ChatGPT was serious, but at the same time, it never asked proof of what I was telling it. This can affect the learning process because at certain times I wasn't sure if I was actually learning or I was just spitballing or giving it hypotheticals to learn from. Um, and so oftentimes ChatGPT moved me forward even though I didn't show any level of mastery. And even in its own audit, ChatGPT told me that I was an above beginner in thinking, but still needed work in executing operations. And it said that I understood concepts, and now I need to prove I can apply them under pressure. It acknowledged that it also acknowledged that it moved conversations forward rather than holding the line. While this was a fairly extensive experience, I do plan to continue using this platform to maintain and sustain operations. I think the moments I learned most was when AI did not agree with me. Um, it was those moments where it told me that I was wrong and gave me the reason why. So thank you, and that is the end of this presentation.